Welcome to Bible Smack. Alright, John 8, verse 4. They say unto him, Master, this woman was taken in adultery, in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what sayest thou? They said, tempting him that they might have to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he heard them not. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself, and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go, and sin no more. God bless the reading of his word. Alright, that is the text of the woman caught in adultery. The modern versions may claim that that's not in the Bible. King James keeps it in the Bible, and it is in the Bible because it's what Jesus did and said. But basically, some interesting things to note is what was Jesus doing when he was writing on the ground? Well, a lot of commentators have said that it may be that he's quoting from Deuteronomy, where it talks about credible witnesses. Okay, so the woman's caught in adultery. In Jewish law, Moses did have a death penalty for people who were committing adultery. Now, when they did it, it was they would stone the woman and the man. There's a little thing missing from the equation in John chapter 8. Where's the guy? When Jesus asked, he was without sin, cast the first stone. It's not just saying that, hey, hypocrites. It was going a little further. It was saying, is there anyone here who is a credible witness? Now, the question is, where is the adulterer? And where is, how did they know when to catch this woman in the act? And why couldn't they catch the guy? So it seems like there was collusion. In other words, this was a setup. This was a trap. And so Jesus has basically justified the woman, and he had to, because they were trying to trap him. Because you see, if he had just said, well, you got to follow Moses' law, the Romans who ran that country at the time would have simply said, hold on, we don't have that law. We do that all the time, And so you don't, you do that, you're just murdering somebody. Okay. So we're not down with that. You're going to have to, go to jail, be arrested, or, worse. But basically, if he did not, then, well, you're a sinner and you have broken Moses' law. Okay. So this was a very clever trap. And the woman recognized that Jesus was the Messiah, but she had, apparently fallen into sin. But yet, Jesus did not condemn her. He simply told her to, repent. Just don't do it again. Don't live that way. So this is going to be an interesting topic later on in this conversation. I'm looking at this documentary that was put out under the ministry of Steven Anderson. He's got a lot of, well, not a lot, probably about 12 of these documentary movies that he does. Some of them are really good. I can't find any, some of them I can't find anything wrong with. I think I liked the New World Order Bible Versions movie. But, he had a really interesting one dealing with Buddhism and Japanese lifestyle and the Mexican holiday of death and all that kind of stuff, Dios de Muertes. But basically, whenever I do, I might have like a little club or whatever on Facebook, and I'll post it up. But I'm careful to kind of say I'm only saying this movie is good. I'm not saying his whole ministry is good, because there's very deep flaws that the guy has, and one minute they come off with something good, and the next minute they come off with something goofy. And this is one of those that was terrible. It was called Marxist Lucifer King. Basically a big hit piece on Martin Luther King. Now, he does try to have truthful critiques, but not objectively truthful critiques. And I'll get into that in a second. But the main objections is that Martin Luther King was a heretic, Martin Luther King was an adulterer, and Martin Luther King was a communist. And basically, when it came to his death, they were like, they had an interesting article about Martin Luther King's family believed that the guy who was set up to be his murderer was actually innocent. They did believe that guy. But, and then that's interesting. Maybe the guy didn't do it. Maybe the family could, tell something, and they knew that, MLK's life had lots of people trying to assassinate him all his life. And, maybe the government was doing it. Well, anyhow. But basically, when you leave out a detail, it can totally change the entire message around. So, let me go over these. The first thing is that Martin Luther King is a heretic. They have a bunch of quotes about MLK, and basically, there's things of him denying the virgin birth, denying the resurrection of Christ, denying a lot of essentials to Christianity. Okay, but there is a but here. They didn't tell you something else. There's a YouTube video that I will post up with this linked, and basically it's Martin Luther King telling his conversion story. And his conversion story apparently happened well after, years after he was a minister. He was not a Christian until, or a true Christian, I should say. He was not saved until the time that he was marching through Selma, Alabama. That all the death threats got to him, and that he had abandoned the teachings that he had gotten taught while he was in the university and getting his doctorate in theology. Okay, and at that time, I think he went to Union Theological Seminary, very left wing, very Marxist, very anti-God, so he was trained to not believe in the Bible. Okay, so and there's also a claim that he had done some whatchamacallit. It's when you quote somebody but you say it as yourself, so you're quoting big blocks of your own, there was claims that he had done that. I know I just skipped my brain, but y'all know what the word is. Somebody will. When you say, if I quote a book and I just say it's my words. It's late at night while I'm doing this. I'm sorry. So anyhow, basically, Still trying to think of that. Well, if he was doing that, then, obviously, he's going to be parroting whatever is around. But as a student, that's really what you're doing. You try to put in your own words, but, that's what you're doing is, you're being indoctrinated with this stuff, and then you just say back. Well, anyway, in his conversion story, he said that, the issue of human sin and depravity and things like that, they don't have the easy solutions that are offered, in, basically Christian liberalism. It wasn't, working. And, he got to be shaken down to his core, and he started to remember the gospel of his, forefathers and his father, when they were, that was a group of Baptist preachers. They were black church Baptist preachers. And so he had basically repented of the social gospel as far as a way of salvation, and he came to believe in Jesus Christ in real life. And he was already an ordained minister at that point. Okay, he had already pastored a church. Now, it's really the church's fault, as far as like why did they put a fellow who was a heretic as their pastor? Okay, so he got empowered that way, but the reason he was doing it is because it would help him in his cause. Okay, he needed a social standing, and in the black community, the pastor had a social standing, much like a chief would for a tribe. Okay, he was the representative leader, and he needed that, and I think God used that. As far as like, the thing with the gospel and stuff like that, I think at that point, you're not really seeing him. He's really on the road. He's not really pastoring a church anyhow at that time in his life. From then on, he's really kind of on the road and stuff. But he did. I think you can recognize that he was nominally a pastor. Okay, and he practiced pastoral things. Now, later guys who claim, rode on his coattails, like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, they weren't real pastors. Okay, they got the status, but they never did anything with that. But Martin Luther King did come from that background. He did pastor. And, this is where you got to go to Scripture, and Scripture says something very interesting here when Jesus is getting after the Pharisees. So, Matthew 23. Alright. He says, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. Okay, so in other words, the Pharisees are in a godly role. They're in a godly office, and you should respect the office. So in that situation, socially speaking, Martin Luther King, I think in that way we can recognize that he was a pastor. But obviously he was not doing it the right way. He should have gotten saved, then get baptized, then get ordained. And I've known guys who've had different issues, and like one pastor I knew, he decided he'd get rebaptized, and basically he just said, I got baptized when I was 5, and I just wasn't sure that it was real to me, and blah blah blah. And basically, he went and got himself baptized. I had a problem with that because I felt like he needed to be reordained. Okay, so I do think that if MLK had been pastoring a church, then that would have been the ideal thing to do. But God does take people in circumstances for reasons. Okay. You see this in the Bible a lot of places. One place is with Samson. Okay, Samson was not a godly man. Okay, and there's going to be mention of an ungodly thing of MLK in a bit. But Samson was not a godly man, and he had fornicated, and he did all sorts. He got drunk, And then, like, eventually, the one commandment left was to keep his hair long, and he was with a heathen, and she got his hair cut. So, he lost everything. But he was in a place, God still used him, and at the end of his death, even though he had to die, he killed all the Philistines with him. And so he wiped out, like, over 1,000, maybe thousands, I think it was. But nevertheless, God be glorified. Okay. So basically, with MLK, God used MLK. All right. Now, the next thing is the issue of the adultery, and Steve Anderson really delights in this. I mean, you just watch the guy; he just gets excited. He's like, orgies. He was doing this, he was doing that, blah blah blah. Well, basically, the FBI would bug Martin Luther King, and they'd bug his hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff. They suspect him of being a communist. And some of his friends were very socialistic and Marxist and stuff like that. So, yeah, I can understand that. I don't know if that was really what we see in the Constitution. Okay, I don't know if they were right to just be bugging somebody's room over suspicions. But it gets deeper than that. So they go and they start bugging him and stuff. And what they find is apparently there are, MLK is having affairs and all that kind of stuff. Well, here's the problem. Then they take it to him and they start threatening him, and then they take it to the media. Well, was adultery against the law? No. I mean, there might be some things still left over as far as, like, could Coretta Scott King have been like, yeah, I'm divorcing you and I'm going to take you for all you got, sucker, because you had committed adultery? That might have been still in place, and she could have done that. But as far as, with the government was concerned, they were only supposed to bug him, only supposed to be concerned with him being a communist and having a communist plot to do something violent. None of that at all. Why are they threatening him? Why are they even bringing that up? And on top of it, when they're yelling at him in this, like, letter, it's like, you beast, you animal, you're an animal, you a dirty animal, you're a dirty beast. Well, I've seen different older, racist jargon that has been brought about to black people, and that is racist, okay? That is, you're an animal, okay, because you're black. You're not a human. You're a beast. And, I mean, you could argue about, like, well, you were doing something perverted, so it was beastly or something, or, you could argue that a little bit, but, what they were revealing on their documentary, I mean, it's just, blah, 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 you're a fella. So basically, these guys are racist. Okay? And the FBI was racist and it had a motive. It wasn't, like, totally all about that. I know that there was a war with communism going on, and I can respect that to a point. But really, what was going on there, that was completely illegal. Okay? So it's interesting that Anderson isn't pointing that out. I mean, he'll get on there with Alex Jones and they'll talk about wiretapping all day long and how bad this is, and they wiretap somebody, and then all of a sudden, they was documentary MLK, they're not fair at all. They're just like, okay, yeah, they're wiretapping, we're gonna find them doing something wrong, So basically, there is just a total lack of objectivity. When you look into that stuff, you gotta go back to this woman and caught in adultery thing going on, alright? Because basically, that's what they're doing. They are, setting this up. And you gotta wonder if this FBI is not working with all these prostitutes and all that kind of stuff to begin with. Okay? Were they really like, oh, we just happened know when it was going to happen. No, I think they were working with everybody, interlinked, and maybe they were paying off the prostitutes to help out. Okay, so, you have a lot of suspicion there. And even Jesus figured out that. Okay? I mean, not that Jesus can't, but I'm saying that Jesus wasn't even shy about saying, hey, hold on there. Okay? We're not to be part of that kind of dirty stuff. You gotta watch out. And I'm not saying that I'm like always a sinless, spotless lamb or something like that, okay? But like basically, when it comes to like accusations and stuff like that, you gotta be careful about how you're handling things and not getting entangled with this kind of stuff yourself. And that's what's going on, is that they're the FBI's gotten dirty at that point. So, basically, King did fess up. Coretta decided to stay with him anyway. And, because there was an ulterior motive. They still wanted to keep the segregation going and all that kind of stuff, and they liked that system. As far as like the communism thing, now Martin Luther King, I think he was registered as a Republican. Like most black people are registered as Republican. But, to be honest though, he probably does seem to be pretty socialist in his economic understanding. I've seen a lot of quotes from him. I'm not getting a really good scholarly sense. I'm just seeing quotes here and there. And there are occasions where he is critical of communism. But obviously a lot more where he's critical of capitalism. But I think you got two things going on. Maybe it's just the fact that he was in a different place and he just happened to be wrong. And what I mean is he happened to be wrong because what was going on in the South was socialistic. When they're forcing separation, that's the government getting involved in the social issue. Okay? So, what was going on with the Jim Crow laws, that was Democrat. And it was liberal and socialist. It was progressive. Okay? It's just it wasn't progressive in the favor of black people. It was directly against. And here he is. He wasn't that old. He looks kind of mature, but at the end of the day, he died about 39. So, he hasn't, lived a long life to kind of like see what's going on. He's just been stuck in the system and he's fighting the system. All right. He hasn't seen if this works out. One thing to kind of notice is that he was a pacifist, and he really was a pacifist. Okay, I know that there's a lot of like black radicalism, and they'll pick him up to kind of jump on his name and stuff, but that's not where he was at. What I mean is that he talked about pacifism as a Christian doctrine, and he practiced that. That wasn't really, 1920s communism was violent. It was about, let's get our guns ready for a violent overthrow. And then the FBI started to get, mix it up with them, and that didn't work. Well, MLK really starts off more pacifistically. And he's going to say nonviolent resistance. He actually got, beat up and, bricks thrown at him and all sorts of crazy things. I mean, just a lot of violent attacks. And he would refuse to press charges. He refused. He would get physically attacked and he would refuse to press charges. That's not what we're seeing like with the BLM crowd, okay? In fact, there were black radicals that came after him and attacked him brutally. He once got brutally attacked over Massachusetts by black radicals, and he also was stabbed by a black woman in the chest. Not 100% sure if that was totally political, but nevertheless, he was the victim of black radicals, okay? So, no, he was not BLM, okay? You have to understand that. He had an understanding of morals and integrity that you're not seeing in this generation. Okay, when you see MLK walking around, what's he doing? He's dressed up nice in a suit. He's got class. What do you see today? Okay, people dressing jungle looking and savage and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, white and black, but I mean, it's just nasty. Okay, there's just a lot of nasty, decrepit people. Okay, they can't control themselves. They got psychological problems, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of drugs. That's not where he was at. There were some interviews that I'd seen in the past that he was for traditional marriage, that he was for pro-life. Okay, he did have a Christian conscience, ethics to some things. And so, you have to kind of see where he is. There were some, not a lot, because I mean, he was critical of capitalism. But there were some things where, he said, look, communism fails because it doesn't understand the individual. Something he said once. Then he also said that, what you see is that there's a strict capitalism for the poor man, but there's a socialism for the rich man. Okay? Obviously, that kind of sounds like he's looking negative at it. All right? When people talked about he took an anti-war stance, he wasn't rabid about the issue. He just cited an opinion, and he was against it. Why? Because in Vietnam, they were run by French Catholics, and he had heard them described as basically Nazis. Okay, and that the guy who ran Vietnam was a Nazi dictator, and that the people had voted for a socialist nation to get rid of the Nazi dictator. Okay, it's like, well, I'm not going to support the Nazis. Okay, and that was one of the big problems. And that wasn't just socialists who were against Vietnam. Barry Goldwater had some issues with Vietnam, and you could have heard the same speech coming out of him. So you have to really kind of look at these things, contextualize them. I know that there were independent Baptists who were very critical of MLK, probably because of some of these things, putting these things together and kind of saying, well, that's not what we represent. I think it's fine to kind of say, okay, well, I'd heard he was a liberal, and I heard he had adultery and stuff, and to be mad about that. But, you do have to understand things in terms of the big picture. That, yes, there was oppression that was going on, and yes, he was driving an engine to get rid of that oppression. And no, he was not going in as far left a direction as many of our contemporaries have today. It's 1960. It wasn't, 2017. But, that's the thing, though, is that, you have to be accurate when you talk about people. And, I'm not offended by the fact that the guy, Anderson, puts up, the other side. But my problem is the Lord hates unjust scales, okay? And you can't just look at somebody from just a negative or just a positive. You got to look at the whole enchilada and see what's going on. I have my doubts that one Christian hero, C.S. Lewis, I have my doubts that he was really legitimately born again and saved, okay? I think it was kind of a tradition. I think he struggled with, a little bit of Christian liberalism and a whole lot of Roman Catholic teaching. That, these were issues that he didn't really have firmly planted down, and he had a very odd doctrine about, well, as far as a biblically odd doctrine about salvation. He didn't understand it. So, he caused me to doubt whether he was really saved, and the guy had a mistress. But in the overarching view of history, the guy did a lot of positive things for Christianity, and it's okay to respect that. Okay? You look at these characters. Abe Lincoln. It doesn't seem that he converted to Christianity until, the Gettysburg Address. About that time in his life. And there are a lot of negatives that, the war was handled pretty badly. And, a lot of people ended up dead. Did he really do things correctly, when we're talking about 500,000 people's lives at stake? there's always goods and bads and positives, but you got to go in the overarching direction. And it's a little bit of a, honoring your father and mother type of thing. Okay? The people that got us where we're at, we need to look at them in a respectful light. Not to be like Ham laughing at Noah. No, you don't disrespect him, okay? Even if he's screwing up like you will, you don't disrespect him. And then what that cursed Canaan because of what he did. That's where we're at. Don't sit here and take the past and say, okay, well now we're gonna just laugh and mock. Now, obviously, you want to learn from their mistakes. Okay, if there's a bad route, you want to get away from that. But basically, you really don't. You don't get into a hate fest. When I look at, where I've been, there are different times. I try not to. I think I have, going through the, past things I've said, I've tried not to. Okay, I've tried to be fair. You catch me in a moment where I'm probably not fair. But, you have to attempt that. And so, with this, it's a very damaging documentary. Because, now, I don't think, I think the video, as far as like the material that was against MLK was racist. I don't, I'm going to be fair. I don't think Steve Anderson in his heart is a racist. Why? Because he does minister to black people in his own congregation and on missionary journeys and stuff like that. If he was truly a racist, he wouldn't want to hang out with people in his personal life like that. Okay, so I'm not going to, throw the R word real quick. I got some suspicions he's racist about Jews. Right? Because there's a lot more to that. But, when it comes to this, I mean, if anything, he's probably mad at MLK because he hung out with Jews. Right? But basically, he took material that was racist against the guy, probably trying to defend the honor of some Indiana Baptists who are probably also racist, because, I mean, I've seen a lot of, I want to frame all Indiana people. There are some, white supremacists and stuff up in Indiana. I'll just say that. But anyhow, at the end of the day, though, it's not something you want to put out, because that's not where the gospel goes with stuff like that. And so, basically, all it's going to do is damage those of us who do take the Bible more literally. Even though we don't teach that, and say, hold on, get that away from me, okay? And, as far as, like, with things with Martin Luther King, there's some incredibly heroic things that he did. And, there's things you honor. You don't want to make it an idol. That's true. Because there are people that probably worship him as a demigod. Let's face it. I mean, there's some people that idol worship that guy to death. And if Martin Luther King were here, he'd tell him to stop. Okay? But basically, you want balance. So, with a documentary like this, it might have material that's, good for correcting, worshiping him as an idol, but it does the opposite, and then there's a big problem there. You don't want to go hating on people, especially, who are you? Some people are put in great, powerful positions in their life, and they'll make history, and they will be remembered. Well, you try to be remembered for the good things. Don't make them an idol. Remember, they all had their problems too. But, you gotta stop there. Catch you later.